Why do Twitter users make bad fighters? Well, they're too quick to retweet. So, you've just been killed. You go to do your first PvP experience, and you find yourself in a cold, dead puddle in the middle of Cyrodiil, or a battleground, depending on your flavor of choice. And you start searching online, how do I not die? And the first thing that comes up is just be more defensive. But a lot of people don't really explain what that means. Today, we're going to talk about all the things that you need to do to stay alive. That way you can have a better experience in Cyrodiil, Battlegrounds, the Imperial City, or otherwise, because there's quite a few things and tactics that you may not be thinking about. Let's break those down in this video. But also, before we jump into it, please like and subscribe. We try to shoot for a 5 to 10% like to view ratio. And if you have a friend, send this to a friend who's constantly finding themselves dead inside of Cyrodiil. And let's talk about how we can change that. And I hope I don't spook you, but this is the character attribute sheet. Oftentimes, people don't like to look at this because they would rather copy people's builds, and I totally understand why that is. With over 650 sets in ESO, different stat combinations that you could do with your attributes, skill combination, potion combinations, it's easier to just copy and paste what people do, but then that overlooks how they are in PvP. For example, when we do this video, we're going to talk about different types of dying, because there's a pretty big difference. For example, if you're getting one shot, there's a very big difference on the stats you need versus if you're running out of resources because you're in prolonged fights. For example, if you're getting one shot, you probably need a little bit more armor, resistance, health, or just a little bit more general knowledge on things not to get hit by. Don't stand inside of, a big bottle of fire that's being, tossed over the side of a keep. That's probably going to be suboptimal for your health. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're running out of magicka or stamina, or both, you're in a completely different scenario, and the defensive sets that you need to wear are actually sustain sets. And those are the two most common types of death. Dying to other people's burst, or standing in things that instantly kill you, or running out of resources and being whittled down. Those are the two most common types of death. There is a third one I usually try to mention, and that is being killed. Generally when you're not expecting it, by somebody either out of stealth, or you think you're in a 1v1 and then somebody else comes in and completely third parties you, and unfortunately you're not prepared for it. And each of those requires you to look at your stats differently. So as you watch this video, I want you to be thinking to yourself, when you go into a battleground, when you go into Cyrodiil, what are the most common types of deaths that you experience? And because we're going to highlight all the resources that are important, all the skills, all the potions, all the things that might help you, but keep in the back of your head, you as a player, how can you relate this to yourself? And so let's start and use this character, because it's my main character, as a bit of a summary as to how it's both defensive and offensive. The very first thing you probably notice about this character is it has ridiculous amounts of magicka. Now, most people attribute magicka to just having the ability to cast a lot of abilities, and that certainly is helpful. Not necessarily defensive, but a very key word that you'll notice in here is shield abilities. Shield abilities is a very important word, ladies and gentlemen, because it gives you access to pressing a button and gaining a damage shield that essentially acts as a heal and a shield in one. So as a sorcerer, not only do I have the ability to teleport around, I have the ability to make powerful shields, which we'll review in a second. Another important attribute is the health. Now, obviously, if you have 0 health, you're in a very suboptimal situation. You've been killed. And then unless you're being resurrected, you're going to stay dead until you teleport back to a keep or you're revived by another player. And you don't want to be in that state for very long. Health is the key attribute to keeping yourself alive. I generally recommend 30,000 health minimum to go into Cyrodiil. You'll notice that mine is lower, and that's because I am wearing some sets that make up for it. Stamina is another important thing, because you got to be able to sprint, block, roll, dodge. A lot of magicka characters will go into Cyrodiil and they'll find themselves in a situation where they're like, oh, I have no stamina. Now, if you find yourself in situations where you're constantly running out of stamina as a magic user, try stat potions. You can use triglyphs to give yourself magicka health and stamina versus just magicka or health. Same with triunes on your jewelry pieces. There's a lot of different things that you can experiment with. Don't think that you just have to use a new stamina set or completely change your whole things around, just start weaving into using more potions. Recoveries are also very important. If you find yourself in situations where you're like, Jake, I'm getting into these fights and people are just whittling me down. I'm so defensive, but I'm getting whittled down. And don't worry, this video will also include a section where we break down the most popular PvP sets and why they're popular and how they're good to keep you alive. Recoveries is very, very important in doing so. And my recoveries are decent. We're going to look at some sets that make them even higher. When it comes to your spell and weapon damage, oftentimes, if you're not a shield-based user, usually in a Magicka user, usually you're trying to build up your spell damage, with the exceptions usually of Mag Wardens and Mag Sorcerers. Mag Wardens and Mag Sorcerers, they love their shields. Templars can do a flexibility of both, but most other Magicka classes are focused more on their spell damage for their damage output. And then they utilize different things, such as having higher physical and spell resistance to keep them alive, or other healing-based abilities. Because you might be thinking to yourself, well, I can heal myself. That's true. Higher spell damage leads to higher self-healing, which, if you can heal the health that you're missing, that's just as good as, staying alive. So, the only other important stats here, just to quickly break down, spell penetration. Usually you just need 7,000 to 8,000 minimum spell penetration. There are quite a few PvP builds, especially Dragon Knights, especially Templar, Stam Wardens. They definitely want more penetration. Most stamina-based classes love to penetrate you against your will, unfortunately. But it's just going to be kind of depending upon the build that you're using. But usually 7,000 to 8,000 minimum if you're just building for stats. Crit resistance, it used to be bare minimum 1,200, 1,300. Just keep in mind if you're in Cyrodiil that has CP versus no CP content, because some people get their crit resistance from the champion point lines. Just keep stuff like that in mind, but generally I would say 1,500 is a good number to have, because you don't want to get crit by people, because if people crit you, then they're going to do more damage, and that's generally not very good. And just to quickly summarize attributes too, a lot of people think, oh, I didn't make 30,000 health. Well, thank God I still have 64 attributes in stamina, or Magicka. Feel free to take all of these points out of one resource and put them into another. You can easily rebalance yourself based on what you need for your character. I'm constantly using sets and things that are different because I find that my playstyle does not match other content creators. It does not match the written guides that I use, and because of that, you're going to find yourself thinking, maybe instead of Tri-Stat potions, I want to use Invis pots or something, completely different. I want to use ones that increase my physical and spell resistance. There's so many options, and we're going to continue to break those down. But let's first start with shields, because, well, shields are pretty good. This is also affected by Battle Spirit. We're in Cyrodiil, just so everybody sees it. So the skill tooltips here is affected by Battle Spirit. Just means that my shields are weaker than they would be in a normal overland zone. You can see that if we do not have a pet active, we heal for 10,000 health and regain a damage shield of 14,870 just by pressing our Y button. That's a pretty big one, but you can see that it scales off of your max health or Magicka and is capped at 72% of your maximum health, meaning that you need to balance having high resources for these if you want to get a good output. Another thing that most classes will have access to is speed ups, as well as things that give you other types of buffs. For example, Major Resolve, Minor Expedition. Major Resolve gives you some more physical and spell resistance every time I press the LB button and go into my lightning form. And then I also gain a little bit of a speed buff. Now, speed usually isn't attributed with defense, but if you're able to break line of sight on an enemy, if you're able to get in and out of combat faster, that is going to be a little bit more defensive because it's adding to your abilities to keep yourself alive. Another thing along the same vein is a decent amount of classes have access to teleports. Or if you're a vampire, you have access to teleports. Well, guess what? Teleporting is a fantastic way to get away from people because you're literally whooping across the battlefield. Another thing to keep in mind too is there's quite a few Mages and Fighters Guilds abilities that you can put on your hotbar, and they will give you access to passive buffs. This one including giving me a 5% Magicka increase, which is fantastic for us Magicka characters. It also gives us Major Savagery and Prophecy, which is certainly not a slap in the face. We'll take that too. Another perfect example of this is Bound Armaments. While slotted on either of your ability bars, you increase your max Magicka by 8%, and you gain Minor Resolve and Minor Protection, increasing your physical and spell resistance and reducing your damage taken by 5% and increasing your physical and spell resistance by 2974. All classes have access to different versions of these, and some of them are universal. For example, Temporal Guard from the Psijic Order line, while slotted, you gain minor protection, reducing your damage taken by 5%. This also allows you to go back in time by 4 seconds, which is defensive-ish in the sense that you can go out, expend a bunch of resources, go back in time. You can jump off a wall, have everybody chase after you, teleport back onto the wall. Temporal Guard is one of the funnest abilities that you can use in PvP, and it will help keep you alive. Another thing, too, is a lot of your ultimates will have access to a ability to keep you alive. Now, it's not always obvious, but things like Absorption Field, which silences everybody inside of an area around you, is pretty helpful. If people can't attack you, they're probably not going to be able to kill you, unless they speak really mean words to you. But everybody has access to different things. You can create blizzards if you're a warden. You can make corrosive armor if you're a dragon knight. Every class has the ability to do something that's able to keep them alive from an ultimate perspective. And this is important to keep in mind, because the general best way that I encourage everybody to make their skill bars is have a very offensive front bar and a defensive back bar. The reason for this is it's obvious when you're using your abilities what you need to be using. You just flip-flop between the two of them, and you can then also weave in sets that are more defensive on the back bar and then more offensive on the front bar. You don't have to do it that way. I just find that it's helpful when you're starting out in PvP to use both bars and all of your abilities to your advantage. That way you know which bar you're on, what you have access to, and then you just flip to the other one when you're switching modes. It's a bit like turning a croc, from sport mode back into normal mode. That's you with your front back bar. Perfect example of this is if you have a defensive back bar, you can use the defending trait on your back bar, meaning that you'll have increased physical and spell resistance by 3276. And then you can focus like something like sharpened on the front bar. And I want to start with my example of a set, which comes from Balsanar, which is Roxa the Warped Guise. Now, if you use that, you gain a tri-stat 1 piece of Stam, Mag, and Health Recovery of 70, but also every second you're in combat, up to 30 stacks, you will increase your max stamina, max magicka recovery, and max health recovery by 8, meaning that if you have been in combat for 30 stacks to recover, so just 30 seconds of combat, you're going to have an extra 240 of all of those resources, which is just absolutely fantastic. The amount of abilities, roll dodging, blocking that you're going to be able to do is going to be absolutely fantastic, but there's a perfect reason why some other sets are really good. For example, this is Wretched Vitality. This is one of, if not the most popular PvP set over the last 2 years, because while in combat, applying a major buff or debuff with a duration to a target grants you 260 magicka and stamina recovery for 15 seconds, and then while applying a minor buff or debuff with a duration to a target grants you 130 magicka and stamina recovery for 15 seconds. This is a crafted set. Anyone watching this video can get this set right now, and there's a reason it's popular. Magicka and stamina recovery are fantastic. Your ability to stay alive sometimes hinges upon your ability to have extra resources, and this is a set that will give you access to tons of recoveries, meaning that you can be in combat using your abilities for much longer. But next, let's talk about Trainee. Trainee is one of the most unique sets in ESO because it's one of the only sets outside of a monster set to give you a 1-piece bonus. That being that of 1458 maximum health. Now, this may shock you if you've been watching the video up to this point, but health is fantastic. And if you're using 2 5-piece sets and then a mythic, this is literally the perfect 1-piece to go for any PvP combo, in my opinion, regardless of if you're a Magicka character, whether you're a stamina character, whether you're a tank, a healer, a stealth character. You'll want the extra health more than likely. And if you're using a mythic and you can't weave in anything else, this is the absolute go-to 1-piece for you. Some other really popular options that we've seen over the years are sets like Daedric Trickery, because when you deal damage, you gain 1 of 5 random major buffs for 21 seconds, and you can get a new one every 9 seconds. Those are Expedition, Protection, Mending, Heroism, or Vitality. It just goes to show how popular a set can be. Even when it's giving you a random defensive buff, it's still exceptionally popular. Now, the really nice thing about Daedric Trickery is its 2, 3, and 4 are consistent. health, stamina, magicka, you probably can use on pretty much every single character. And the other thing that we haven't really mentioned at this point is even if you are a stamina character, usually you do have access to one or two or even a handful of magicka-based attacks or defensive things or utility type things for yourself as well. Let's talk about another defensive set that doesn't rely on sustain to help you. That's Mark of the Pariah. Just gives you more physical and spell resistance based on the amount of health that you're missing. Pretty great. And in fact, one of the best vampiric perks was Undeath. It was so popular that it pretty much made everyone into a vampire that went into PvP. It was so popular that it had to be nerfed. And when it was nerfed, a lot of people looked and said to themselves, maybe I'm going to switch to a set like Mark of the Pariah instead of being a vampire. I don't have to suffer the stage 3 vampire consequences, and I'll have a little more junk in the trunk. It's 2, 3, and 4 of health, armor, with an increase of your physical and spell resistance based on your missing health is just overall great at keeping you alive, and that's half of the battle. Another fun set that people generally only think of as offensive is Heartland Conquer, and that's because it's 2, 3, and 4 as weapon and spell, and increases your max mag and stam, and then it increases the effectiveness of your weapon trait, minus ornate or intrinsic, which you wouldn't want to use anyway. And a lot of people think, well, this is an offensive set, but this can actually be both, and this is why defense is just such a word that doesn't really mean what a lot of people think it means, because, for example, on your front bar, you can double the effectiveness of your sharpen trait, and then on the back bar, you can double the defensiveness of your defending trait. If for some reason you hate random defensive sets that help you with sustain, you can get Amber Plasms. If you love Runes of Mazatoon, its 5-piece will give you access to 245 of all of the recoveries with a bit of magicka, crit chance, and weapon and spell to go on top of it. I don't suggest it over the other ones, but it's a good example of a set that you could use that gives you less reward for not going through the proccing system. What is the proccing system? Well, it's ZeniMax's way of rewarding you for doing something. There's a reason why proc sets are not as good as no proc sets. And some of you might be thinking to yourself, Jake, what is a proc set? A proc set is simply a set that if you do something, you get something. We talked about a proc set earlier when we talked about Roxas. Now, Roxa is a perfect example of a proc set. While in combat, this happens. If you have to do something to gain it, it's a proc set. If you just get it, for example, I have Drudic's Curse, which just gives me resources, is a non-proc set. It's the reason why your 2, 3, and 4 pretty much always work on a 5-piece inside of no proc campaigns, whereas your other sets will not. It's not necessarily important to know this specifically, and thank you to the individuals behind me that are consistently buffing me. The important part is to know that ZeniMax will usually reward you by giving you extra resources, damage, defense, by actually going through and proccing something, which is why sets like Wretched Vitality are so much better. You have to actually do something to earn the buff, and because of that, you gain significantly more recovery than you do with something like Amber Plasm, which just gives you a flat rate. Another perfect example of everything that we've been talking about so far is the most popular mythic in the game, the Saint and the Seducer mythic. It gives you access to a rolling variety of major buffs and minor buffs that will be attached to your enemy based on basically pretty much just going on and wielding it at random, which makes it fun, but it also gives you access to both defense and offense. And you'll notice that as we talk about some of the other more popular mythics is that sometimes you would assume that they only do one thing, but they actually usually help you both defensively and offensively. For example, Death Dealer's Feet, one of my most popular mythics in the game. Every time you're in combat, every 2 seconds, up to 30 stacks, you gain an increase to your total amount of health, stamina, and magicka by 88. Meaning you can get a couple extra 1,000 of those resources just by being in combat. Having more magicka will not only increase your shields and increase your damaging abilities to some extent, but it also just helps keep you alive by giving you access to health. It also helps giving you, the ability to block, roll dodge, sprint by giving you extra stamina. I know quite a few Marken Ring enthusiasts. They like to gain 100 weapon and spell damage, but also 1,157 armor for every 3-piece set that they're wearing. Another one is Sea Serpent's Coil, because while at full health you gain a 40% damage reduction. It's not until after you get attacked that you gain Serpent's Rebuke, which gives you then access to Major Berserk and Major Courage, increasing your damage done and your weapon and spell damage, well, taking away some of your movability by snaring you by 40%. But you can see even in these mythics that are generally seen as very offensively oriented, if somebody's coming out of stealth to try to one-shot you or hit you with a very powerful attack, it's taking a 40% damage reduction off the bat. And yes, there is the Oaken Soul, which gives you access to like pretty much every major and minor buff that you could ever want, bar a few. Yes, there are ways that you can make 1-bar builds, and yes, Oaken Soul can be seen as a defensive-oriented one. I generally just think that usually you want to have access to both bars for PvP content. PvE content, I think heavy attack builds and all those other builds are great. PvP, sometimes you just run out of utility. You know, you want to be able to teleport, but then unfortunately you had to put teleport on a bar that doesn't exist anymore because you're limiting your sorcerer to 1 bar. You certainly can make very powerful 1-bar builds, but I definitely do think that you should try to at least start out with a 2-bar build. And if you play on console, a lot of people hate bar swapping. I just remapped my bar swap to my right thumbstick, or you can use the paddle on the bottom of your controller, and it will make bar swapping so much better for you. And then that takes us cleanly into potions. Now, a lot of people just think to themselves, tri-stat potions. And tri-stat potions are probably the best generic answer that you could ever have when it comes to survivability, because it'll give you health, magicka, and stamina. Boom, immediately back. Fantastic. Now you can use your magicka abilities to make a shield. Now you can sprint. Now you can use anything you need to do. And that usually is a great answer, but you don't have to limit yourself to just tri-stat potions. For example, you can see this Essence of Magicka was created in a way to give you access to Major Intellect, Restore Magicka, Restore Stamina, Major Endurance, which increases your stamina recovery, and then also generate Minor Heroism. That is a fantastic potion. You could be doing all of those things inside of a PvP situation as well, because Heroism will give you access to your ultimate. Dragon Knights love using their ultimate. Every class loves using their ultimate. That can be pretty helpful for you. You can also do it in a way that restores your magicka, gives you major intellect, and gives you major resistances. An increase of 5,280 for 47.6 seconds, meaning that you'll be able to drink this potion by the time it wears off. So think about this as well whenever you're weaving into different things. Potions don't have to be limited just to the ones that you get free from the Crown Store. Now, generally, those are going to be the ones that you use. Tri-stat potions are the easy answer, but they're not the only answer. Because, for example, you could go invisible for 14.4 seconds. That could be pretty helpful to keep you alive. And then you can weave in things such as stamina, major endurance as well to go along with it. And if you're invisible, people probably aren't attacking you as easily. And to kind of round us off, you could even make one that makes you immovable. Become immune to knockback and disabling effects for 10 seconds. Heal yourself, get some health recovery, get some stamina back, and then get some stamina recovery back. These are all the options that you have access to through the potion making system. They could give you a little extra survivability, a little extra damage output in some circumstances, or just give you your resources back. I mean, you could even use escapist poisons if you really wanted to, immobilizing your target and grant you unstoppable, rendering you immune to crowd control effects. And this effect will also break you free of any ongoing effects. You can even use access to poisons like these if you wanted to. And that cleanly takes us into Mundus Stones. A lot of people think that they just need to blindly increase either their max magicka or stamina. You easily can go and increase your physical and spell penetration. You can come increase your maximum health. If you find yourself in a situation where you need more spell resistance and physical resistance, you can increase your recoveries. You can increase your spell damage. All of these are at your disposal. And what always drives me insane as a content creator is that people never consider changing their Mundus Stone. They're like, I gotta keep the Mundus Stone that I have forever. This one gives you a freaking movement speed increase. That's fantastic. Being able to get to places faster, increasing your weapon and strikes for crits, getting access to increased weapon damage, getting access to increased stamina. All of these are fantastic options. If you're finding yourself needing more health, just go get the health one. Go get the health Mundus. If you need more magic, get the magicka Mundus. If you want to have access to more resistance, get the resistance Mundus. People ignore Mundus Stones, and it drives me crazy. People would rather change a full 5-piece set, gold out a brand new one, versus switching their attributes or their Mundus. Switching these are free. You can switch this, go back into a Cyrodiil or Battleground, and try it out immediately and see how much of an impact it makes. In fact, I would encourage you to start changing your potions, your Mundus, and your attributes before you change anything else. Another thing that you can do if you're crafting your own armor is that you can make it light, medium, or heavy. Now, because of the Undaunted passes, which we'll quickly take a little perusal to here, you're going to want to make sure that you have both, because if you use a single piece of at least heavy, medium, or light, you can increase your max health, stam, and magicka by 2% for a maximum of 6%. That's incredible. You definitely want that. You're going to want to use all of them, but the question becomes how many of each piece, and unfortunately it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I'm going to tell it to you. It depends. If you're more magicka based, I would encourage you to have at least between 3 and 5 pieces of light. If you're a stamina character, probably 3 to 5 pieces of medium, and then maybe if you want to be more tanky, at least 3 to 5 pieces of heavy armor. And it will just depend on your resources. For example, light's going to give you access to more magicka recovery. It's going to give you access to penetration, medium, weapon damage, and spell damage. You're going to be able to hit a little bit harder, less penetration, harder hitting, reduce the cost of sneak and some other things. And then heavy armor, yeah, it's going to increase your health recovery and make you a little tankier. Feel free to switch these things around too. They're not going to make a crazy amount of difference. But generally, whichever one you prioritize on, the key generally is I would use the heavy piece as at least your chest, and then the second piece you can use as your legs. And then there's a couple other things that we're going to break down next, such as traits. These are not going to be as important, but generally, at least for the chest piece, you want to use it as your heavy, and you want to put reinforced on it. Other ones, you may want to roll dodge with well fitted. That will keep you alive because you're dodging attacks. You know, that's an important one to put on the rest of your body pieces. But also ones like impenetrable are very important as well, because it's going to give you access to not being crit to death, which is also pretty essential. And that takes us nicely into one of our final topics, which is enchantments. Now, everything we've talked about has been resource focused, and enchantments are probably one of the most resource focused conversations there is, because generally you have to pick between tri-enchantments on body pieces versus a singular enchantment on a body piece. Usually, I like to have a couple of both. For example, a couple tri-stats on the body, a couple regular stats on the body. You see I get 868 magicka on this piece, but then on this one I gain 433 magicka, 477 health, and 434 stamina, which means I technically do get more resources by tri-statting things, but you also may find yourself where you're like, I don't need this much stamina. I have too much stamina based on the buff food that I'm eating, which, spoiler, we will talk about next. So you may think to yourself, I'm just going to alternate between health and magicka. Or vice versa, if you're using a stamina character who doesn't need a lot of magicka, just use stamina and health. And depending on how much health you get, you may think, I don't need this much health. I want to be able to deal more damage, so I'm going to switch to stamina. This also goes perfectly to the traits of your jewelry. You may want to just put health on there, magicka, stamina. You can even increase your movement speed with your jewelry. You can gain a synergy buff, probably not going to help you. Triunes, though, are fantastic. Basically, it's a tri-stat on your jewelry. You can also increase your damage done to enemies below a certain amount of health, not necessarily defense related. You can increase your physical and spell resistance, which generally I don't think is as good as triunes. I definitely think it's okay, but it's not as good. You can increase the jewelry enchantment effectiveness, which usually is DPS focused. For example, the most common thing that you're going to find on jewelry as an enchantment is weapon and spell damage. It's probably going to be the most common one. You could always flip these around. You can always flip your enchantments around on these as well. For example, I like to use the Absorb Magicka enchantment on the back bar, and then just a pretty generic one on the front bar. You can see it's actually suppressed because I'm using double dot poisons on the front bar. But overall, it's really, those are more minor changes, and generally you're really just tweaking your total amounts of stats at that point. But what's not is consumables. And as you can see, there are tons of consumables, from both food to drinks to ones that you can put in your house. You can put this piece of hearty bread in your house, but let's focus on the key ones. Most of the good ones you're going to find either on the market, or if you have them unlocked, you're going to find them in your delicacies. The number one most common food item is probably Bewitched Sugar Skulls, mostly because it's cheap. You aren't able to easily see that right now. There you go. Scrib jelly, flour, columbine, Berez juice, honey. Not very expensive, and It increases your max health, stamina, and magicka by basically over 4,000 and gives you health recovery on top of that. That's a pretty fantastic consumable. Another one that you see some magicka characters experiment with, but it's probably not nearly as popular as Bewitched Sugar Skulls, is this one gives you max health, health recovery, max magicka, and magicka recovery. That's Clockwork Citrus Fillet. Now, if you're using this one, you probably definitely want to make sure that you have a good amount of stamina because you're not getting any max stamina with this food. And vice versa for Artaeum Takeaway Broth, which increases your max health, health recovery, max stamina, and stamina recovery. This one is definitely more popular than its magicka counterpart, but it does suffer from the same drawbacks. If you need to use magicka on your stamina character, which you may not have any abilities that really use that, then you're definitely going to want to consider some tri-stats or having some magicka glyphs. But if you don't have any, this can be a really good tool to use for you being able to subvert having to have any sort of magicka and just go fully into stamina and health. Another one of the most popular PvP consumables increases your max health by 4,312, big boy increase, and it gives you health recovery and stamina and magicka recovery. Most people think that it's better to have the total amount of resources, and there is a train of thought and logic that goes with that, but some people just want the health and then access to recoveries of all of those, and there's definitely a huge market for the bear haunch. A quick shout out to Jewels of Misrule, though, because it is a very cheap consumable, and you realistically want to have a consumable active every second you're in a PvP fight, and this is definitely one of the cheapest unique dishes to get. And it will give you access to maximum health and increase your stam and magicka recovery. You notice, though, that you lose a little bit of total health and you lose the health recovery, but realistically, health recovery inside of Cyrodiil is already nerfed due to Battle Spirit, so this can be a cheap substitute if you're looking to kind of economically get into PvP without fully investing. And to finish this off, we can also talk briefly about champion points. Now, generally, I have found that champion points are generally very similar across multiple characters. But even though it's the same, you can still see that some of these are good. Maximum health, that's good. You know, fortified, that's good. You know, like armor, health, that'll make you more defensive. You'll see other stuff in here too, like Ironclad, reduce your damage taken by direct attacks by 3%, reduce damage taken by single target attacks. You know, a lot of this stuff is, as you would expect, good depending on what you're using. War Mount is also great because it removes all mount stamina costs outside of combat. Mount speed is also very helpful. And Steed's Blessing, which makes you faster, is also helpful. Even out of combat, people think, oh, it's out of combat, it doesn't help me. Getting to places faster, significantly helpful. Trust me. Get this on all your characters. But I don't like talking about champion points as much because a lot of people get stressed about champion points. And I generally do recommend for champion points, you try to resist the urge to tweak them as much because a lot of times the buffs in there are generally either very good or just mediocre, especially for PvP. You're not going to be able to, for example, flank enemies as much as you can in PvE, so don't stress about your champion points as much. Obviously, fill them out to the best of your ability, and the reason that I don't like stressing people out is, one, they're not active in Battlegrounds. You may be in no CP, Imperial City, or Cyrodiil. And the other thing, too, is a lot of you guys watching this video probably don't have maxed out champion points anyway. So I don't want you to be discouraged, like, oh, no, I'm not going to have access to X, Y, or Z champion point, therefore I shouldn't go to PvP. Realistically, these tweaks are pretty minor. That may sound crazy, but I promise it's true. Just focus on the ones that you're able to get, and I'll link in the description below some great guides that you can copy for some of your CP builds and any other generic PvP builds that you want to try. I'll link below some of the more popular loadouts if you're curious as to how they look. But, whew, we have talked about so much in this video, and the funny thing is we've really just focused on defense. But I hope this was helpful, because I feel like a lot of people go into their first PvP experience, and then they die, and they become discouraged. They think that it takes forever to get to an objective, and then they die there. They don't know what they're doing wrong. They don't know how everybody else is able to withstand all these attacks and things. And that's why I wanted to make a video that was dedicated and focusing on the things that you can change, regardless of what class you use, what are some of the best defensive sets in the game, and how you can utilize them to your advantage. But here's the real key about PvP that everybody will tell you. It's generically true, and I have to say it because it is true, is that dying is okay. It's part of PvP. If you've watched any of my live streams, there will be plenty of death, regardless of how good the gameplay would be, regardless of how locked in I am, regardless of how busted the sets that I'm using are. I will still die. You will still die. And you can blame the lag, you can blame the ping, you can blame the sets, you can blame whatever you want. That's totally okay. But at the end of the day, the key is not to avoid death. The key is to have fun and feel like you're making a meaningful impact between deaths. And I hope that these defensive sets will help you stay alive long enough to deal as much damage you need to do to your opponents, get to the objectives, enjoy those big climactic battles that really have kept ESO relevant. Their Cyrodiil battles have always looked fantastic when I've seen them and been a part of them. And so I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. So thank you guys so much again for watching. As always, we're doing our 3 giveaway drawings. All you need to do to enter is leave a comment in the comments below. Second thing is just make sure you're subscribed/follow on Twitch and Twitter, both linked in the description below as well. And the third thing is look for a hidden word to be flashed upon the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. I just want to thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope this was helpful, but if you have any other suggestions or things that you want me to cover, PvP related, PvE related, ESO news, anything, just put it in the comments below. We'll talk about it, and I'll add it to my list of things to cover. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye, guys.
Better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.